The symbolism of red in medieval clothing shimmers like a secret code as you step into a soaring cathedral. Its air thick with incense and the faint hum of distant chants. Hey everyone. Tonight we're diving into a world where colors weren't just pretty, they were power, mystery, and maybe a ticket to the divine. Picture yourself standing in a medieval church, the kind with stone walls that feel cold even in summer, and sunlight pours through stained glass windows, splashing red light across the floor like spilled wine. It's 1397 and you're in Chartres, France, surrounded by pilgrims who've walked miles to pray under this glow. One wrong step in this world, say, wearing the wrong shade of red, and you might not survive the social fallout. Or worse, the bishop's side-eye. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, turn down the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise. And let's get started on tonight's journey together. You shuffle through the cathedral's nave, your woolen cloak brushing the floor. Its hem dyed a deep crimson that cost your family a year's wages. Red wasn't just a color here, it was a shout, a declaration of something bigger than you. In medieval churches, red was the hue of the divine, a visual megaphone for God's presence. The stained glass windows above you blaze with scarlet-robed saints, their halos glinting like embers. These windows, especially in places like Chartres, were the Netflix of the Middle Ages, stories told in light for folks who couldn't read. The red glass, made with gold chloride to get that perfect ruby glow, wasn't cheap. It took a fortune to craft, and only the church or the mega rich could afford it. You crane your neck, squinting at a window showing the Virgin Mary, her red mantle pooling like liquid fire. That red screams divinity, sacrifice, and power, tying her to the blood of Christ and the Holy Spirit's fiery tongues. Let's talk about a big moment, the consecration of Chartres Cathedral in 1260. It was a massive deal. Kings, bishops, and half of France showed up to see this Gothic masterpiece officially blessed. The red in those windows wasn't just decorative. It was a spiritual flex. During the ceremony, sunlight hit the glass, and the whole place glowed like the inside of a ruby. People wept, thinking they were seeing heaven's light. You're there, feeling the crowd's heat, smelling wax from 100 candles and hearing the choir's voices bounce off the vaults. The red light bathes you, and for a second, you believe you're closer to God than ever. That's what the church wanted red as a bridge to the divine, making you feel small but connected. Now, here's a weird one for you. Some medieval priests wore red-dyed shoes during special masses, like on Pentecost. Why red symbolize the Holy Spirit's fire? Sure, but also get this, they thought the shoes made them look holier than thou. Imagine a priest strutting like he's on a medieval runway, red shoes peeking out from under his robes. You'd probably smirk, thinking, nice kicks, Father. But are those really getting you to heaven faster? It's like they believed style points counted in the afterlife. But red wasn't all holy vibes. Historians still debate whether the church used red to control people's emotions, or if folks just projected their awe onto it. Some say the clergy leaned hard into red's psychological punch. Its intensity grabs your attention, makes your heart race a bit. Others argue it was just tradition, carried over from Roman times when red meant imperial power. Either way, you're standing in this cathedral, and the red light feels like it's watching you, judging your every move. You notice the pilgrims around you. One guy's tunic has a red cross stitched on, marking him as a crusader or at least someone who paid for the badge. Red in clothing, like your cloak, was a status thing. Only the elite could wear deep reds, thanks to sumptuary laws that said peasants had to stick to drab browns. Your crimson hem. It's basically yelling, "I'm kind of a big deal." But joke's on you, dyeing that cloak probably involved crushed bugs, kermas, insects to be exact. And the smell during production was like a mix of old fish and regret. You'd laugh if you weren't so busy dodging the bishop's glare for standing too close to the altar. The sensory overload hits hard. The red light flickers as clouds pass outside, casting shadows that dance like spirits. The air's heavy with myrrh, and your boots scuff against stone worn smooth by centuries of feet. Red's everywhere, not just in glass, but in altar cloths, priestly vestments, even the wax seals on sacred relics. It's like the church decided red was the ultimate multi-tool worship. Authority, fear, all in one shade. You wonder if the artisans who made this glass ever got sick of red? Spoiler, they probably did, but they weren't about to argue with the bishop. That's like arguing with your boss while he's holding your paycheck in a lightning bolt. Here's another light jab. Imagine a monk spilling red ink while copying a Bible, cursing under his breath, then remembering he's supposed to be holy. Forgive me, Lord, but this red is ruining my day. You can almost hear it. Red ink, by the way, was used for special headings in manuscripts, called rubrics. From the Latin, ruber for red, it's why we still call fancy book details rubrication. You're picturing that monk now, aren't you? His quill's a mess, and he's praying for a miracle to clean it up. As you leave the cathedral, the red light lingers in your eyes like an after-image of something sacred. You pull your cloak tighter, its crimson edge catching a gust of wind. Red's not just a color, it's a language. Speaking of power, faith, and maybe a little showboating, you're already wondering how it plays out beyond these walls, in castles or battlefields. Remember those red shoes? Yeah, they're probably still strutting somewhere, preaching louder than words. You step out of the cathedral's red-tinted glow, your crimson cloak still flapping like it's trying to make a statement. And now you're trudging toward a castle's great hall, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing isn't just holy, it's pure power. The air's crisp, smelling of wood smoke and damp earth, and you hear horns blaring from the ramparts. It's 1307 and you're in Westminster, England, crashing a royal court buzzing with lords, ladies, and enough ego to fill a moat. Red's everywhere here, but it's not about divine light anymore. It's about who's got the cash, the crown, and the nerve to wear it. You push through velvet curtains into the hall, where tapestries embroidered with scarlet lions flutter like they're alive. The King Edward II, fresh on the throne, sits in a robe so red, it looks like it was dipped in dragon's blood. That robe's no accident. Red in royal court screamed authority, wealth, and a not-so-subtle "don't mess with me." Coronation ceremonies, like the one Edward had last year, were Red's Super Bowl. Picture it Westminster Abbey, packed with nobles, the air thick with frankincense, and Edward draped in a scarlet mantle lined with ermine. The crowd's whispering, not about his vows, but about how much that dye cost. Spoiler, it's more than your village's annual rent. Let's zoom in on that canonical event, Edward II's coronation in 1307. It was a spectacle, but also a mess. Think medieval reality TV. The young king, barely 23, swore his oaths while wearing red robes that took months to make. The dye, probably kermes from crushed insects, came from trade routes stretching to the Mediterranean. You're there, squished between a sweaty knight and a lady fanning herself with a peacock feather, watching the archbishop anoint Edward. The red robe catches torchlight, shimmering like liquid rubies, and you get why it matters. It's not just fashion, it's a contract, tying Edward to centuries of kings who wore red to say, "I am chosen." Too bad the banquet later got rowdy. Someone spilled wine on the robe, and the tailors probably cried harder than the king. Here's an odd fact to chew on: some royals had their red robes perfumed with saffron to smell divine. Yeah, they sprinkled spice worth more than gold on their clothes, because why not flex a little harder? You're sniffing the air now, catching a whiff of Edward's robe saffron. Sure, but also a hint of sweat from the nervous king. Imagine the servant tasked with sprinkling that spice, muttering, "This is why I didn't become a baker." You'd laugh, but you're too busy dodging a courtier's elbow. Red wasn't just for kings, though. Nobles fought to wear it. And sumptuary laws, basically medieval dress codes, made sure peasants like you didn't get too cocky with their wardrobes. These laws, enforced across Europe, said only the elite could rock deep reds. Your crimson cloak. It's pushing the line, and you're getting stares from a duke who's clearly not impressed. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here is a social ladder. The richer the red, the higher you climb. Break the rules and you're fined, or worse, stripped of your fancy threads in public. Talk about a bad day. Historians still debate whether sumptuary laws were about keeping class lines clear, or just a way for royals to hog the best colors. Some say it was economic. Red dye was so pricey. Governments wanted to control the market. Others think it was pure snobbery, like the medieval equivalent of "you can't sit with us." Either way, you're feeling the pressure, tugging your cloak to hide its red hem. Maybe you should have gone with brown. But where's the fun in that? You notice a jester in the corner, juggling apples in a red and gold motley. He winks, and you wonder if he's mocking the whole red obsession. Joke number 2. What do you call a noble who can't afford red dye, a blue-blooded cheapskate? You snicker, but quietly laughing too loud might land you in the stocks. The jester's bells jingle, and the sound mixes with lutes strumming a tune that's way too upbeat for this stuffy hall. You're starting to sweat under your cloak, and the smell of roasted boar from the feast table isn't helping. Red's power isn't just in clothes. The king's throne is draped in scarlet velvet, and his crown has rubies that wink like they know secrets. Every detail screaming, "I'm in charge." You overhear a lord bragging about his red-dyed horse reins because apparently even horses need to flex. It's ridiculous, but you can't look away. The court's a stage, and red's the spotlight. You're half expecting someone to trip over their ego and face-plant into a goblet. Here's the third joke. Why did the king wear red every day? Because he wanted to be the brightest bulb in the castle, literally. You're grinning. But the lady next to you rolls her eyes, her red silk gown rustling like she's above it all. That silk, by the way, probably came from Venice, where dyers guarded their red recipes like state secrets. You're tempted to ask her how much it cost, but you'd rather not get slapped with a glove. As you slip toward the hall's exit, the red around you feels heavier, like it's carrying the weight of crowns and laws. You brush past a guard in a red tabard, his sword hilt gleaming. Outside, the night air hits your face, cool and sharp, and you pull your cloak tighter. That crimson hem's a risk, but it's also a thrill. You're already wondering where red shows up next, maybe in bloodier places than this gilded cage. Remember those perfumed robes? Yeah, they're probably still making servants sneeze somewhere. You slip out of the castle's stuffy hall, your crimson cloak still whispering rebellion against those sumptuary laws. And now you're standing in a dimly lit chapel, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing shifts from royal flecks to something heavier, blood and sacrifice. The air's cool, laced with the musty scent of old wood and candle wax, and you hear a faint creak from pews as monks shuffle in for vespers. It's 1349 and you're in Siena, Italy, surrounded by frescoes that make your skin prickle. Red's no longer just about power. Here, it's the color of suffering, splashed across walls to tell stories of martyrs and Christ's final hours. You're staring at a massive painting of the crucifixion, part of the Passion cycle, where Christ's blood flows in vivid scarlet streams. The artist didn't hold back. Every drop looks like it could stain your hands if you touched it. In medieval religious art, red was the go-to for martyrdom, a visual gut punch meant to hit you where it hurts. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing creeps in here too. Look at the Virgin Mary's robe in the painting. A deep red that screams grief and divinity all at once. It's like the artist knew red could make you feel the weight of sacrifice without saying a word. You're close enough to smell the linseed oil in the paint, and the chapel's silence is so thick it's practically humming. Let's anchor this with a big moment, the commissioning of Duccio's Maestà altarpiece in 1308 for Siena's cathedral. This masterpiece, finished by 1311, was a citywide event. Think medieval blockbuster premiere. Crowds gathered as it was carried through the streets, with red-robed clergy leading the way. The altarpiece's passion scenes, dripping with red, showed Christ's blood and Mary's scarlet cloak, tying sacrifice to salvation. You're there, jostled by onlookers, catching the glint of candlelight on the panel's gold background. The red hits you hard, like a warning and a promise. It's not just art, it's a sermon, and you're stuck in the front row. Here's a weird fact to make you blink some medieval artists: mixed real blood animal. Not human. Don't worry into red paint for holy images, thinking it added spiritual mojo. Imagine a painter stirring pig's blood into his palette, muttering, "This better get me some divine inspiration." You're trying not to laugh, picturing him sneezing from the smell and blaming it on the devil. Joke number 1. Why did the artist use blood in his paint? Because he wanted his work to have a real pulse. You stifle a chuckle, hoping the monks don't notice. Red's role in martyrdom art wasn't just about shock value. It was a code, linking Christ's blood to the martyrs who followed him. You spot a fresco of Saint Sebastian, arrows piercing his body, red trickling down like he's leaking courage. The color pulls you in, makes you wince, but you can't look away. It's like the medieval version of a horror movie, except everyone's praying instead of screaming. The monks around you are chanting, their voices low and rhythmic, and you feel the stone floors chill through your boots. Your cloak's red hem brushes the ground, and you wonder if it's too bold for a place this somber. Maybe you're channeling a bit of that martyr vibe yourself. Historians still debate whether red in passion art was meant to scare people into faith or inspire them to embrace suffering. Some say it was about fear. Red's intensity could make you think twice about sinning. Others argue it was hope, showing blood as the path to redemption. Either way, you're feeling it now. Standing under these frescoes, the red almost pulsing like it's alive. You're half expecting the paintings to start whispering, repent, or at least stop slouching. Joke number 2. What do you call a martyr's red robe in a painting? A fashion statement with eternal consequences. You smirk, but the monk next to you shoots a look that says, "Keep it down, cloaked troublemaker." You adjust your hood, trying to blend in, but that red hem's like a neon sign. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't just about looking holy. It's about connecting to the ultimate sacrifice. Priests and penitents sometimes wore red during Lent, mimicking the blood they revered. It's intense, like signing up for a spiritual marathon. The chapel's flickering candles cast red shadows, making the frescoes seem to move. You smell wax and dust, and the air feels heavy, like it's carrying the weight of all those painted wounds. You notice a pilgrim kneeling nearby, his red sash tied tight, maybe hoping it'll earn him some heavenly brownie points. Joke number 3. Why did the pilgrim wear red to pray? He heard it was the fastest way to get God's attention. You're grinning, but you keep it quiet. This place doesn't feel like it appreciates your sense of humor. As you step toward the chapel's door, the red in those frescoes sticks with you, like a stain you can't shake. Your cloak feels heavier now, its crimson edge tying you to this bloody sacred world. You're starting to see red everywhere: altar cloths, relic cases, even the wine in the priest's chalice. It's not just a color anymore, it's a story, one that's got you wondering what's next. Remember those perfumed royal robes from the castle? They feel like a lifetime ago compared to this raw, red intensity. You step out of the chapel's heavy air, the red of those martyr frescoes still burning in your mind, and now you're weaving through a bustling market square, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing isn't about sacrifice, it's about cold. Hard cash, the sun's low, casting a golden haze over stalls piled with spices, silks, and vats of dye that smell like a mix of earth and regret. It's 1370 and you're in Florence, Italy, elbowing past merchants shouting deals and dodging a cart of squealing pigs. Red's everywhere: bolts of crimson cloth, skeins of scarlet thread. But here, it's not divine or royal, it's a commodity. And the price tag would make your eyes water. You pause at a dyer's stall, where a grizzled man stirs a cauldron of bubbling red liquid, his hands stained like he's been wrestling a dragon. This is Kermes, the king of red dyes, made from tiny insects crushed into a paste that's worth more than gold. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing starts here, in these vats, where color equals wealth. Only the elite kings, bishops, or rich merchants can afford this shade, the kind that doesn't fade after one wash. You lean closer, catching a whiff of the dye's sharp, almost metallic tang, and wonder how many bugs died for that bolt of cloth you're eyeing. Spoiler thousands. Let's anchor this with a big moment: the establishment of the Arte della Lana, Florence's wool guild, which solidified its dye trade dominance by 1317. This guild wasn't just a club for wool nerds, it was a powerhouse, controlling the production of red-dyed fabrics that dressed popes and princes. You're there watching guild members in red-trimmed robes parade through the city, celebrating a new trade deal with Venice. The streets are alive with drums and cheering, and you smell roasted chestnuts mingling with the dye stall's funk. That red cloth they're flaunting, it's a symbol of Florence's economic muscle, dyed with kermas shipped from the Levant. The guild's success turned Florence into a medieval Wall Street, but you're just trying not to trip over a stray goat. Here's an odd fact to make you squirm. Kermes dye came from female insects harvested right before they laid eggs, and medieval dyers called them grains to avoid grossing out their clients. Imagine the merchant whispering, "Just some magic grains." Nothing buggy about it while selling you a crimson cloak. You're smirking, picturing him sweating as you ask too many questions. Joke number 1, why did the dyer hide the bug thing? Because insect juice doesn't sell as well as royal red. You chuckle, but the merchant glares, probably thinking you're mocking his life's work. The trade routes for red dye were no joke. Kermes came from places like Armenia or Spain, hauled across deserts and seas by merchants who'd stab a rival for a good deal. You overhear two traders haggling nearby, their voices rising over the clink of coins. One's boasting about his caravan surviving a bandit attack, all for a sack of Kermes. You're holding a scrap of red wool, its texture soft but heavy, and you realize this stuff crossed half the known world to get here. The dye trade wasn't just business, it was an adventure, with shipwrecks, pirates, and shady middlemen. You're half expecting Indiana Jones to pop out of a stall, clutching a jar of red powder. Historians still debate whether the high cost of red dyes like Kermes drove economic inequality or just reflected it. Some say the dye trade made cities like Florence filthy rich, but only for the top dogs, dyers, and weavers barely scraped by. Others argue it leveled the playing field, letting merchants outshine nobles with their red wardrobes. Either way, you're feeling the market's pulse, where red's price tag decides who's hot and who's not. Your own crimson cloak, a hand-me-down from a cousin with big dreams, suddenly feels like a target on your back. Joke number 2. What do you call a merchant who can't afford Kermes? A guy stuck selling peasant pink? You snicker, dodging a kid hawking red ribbons that look suspiciously faded. The market's noise bells, shouts, the creak of carts wraps around you like a blanket, and you're sweating under your cloak. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't just about looking good, it's about survival in a world where color means status. You notice a wealthy lady in a scarlet gown, her hem dragging through the dirt. She's flexing, but you're betting she didn't stir the dye vat herself. The dyer at the stall grumbles about Venetian competition, and you catch a glimpse of his ledger, scribbled with numbers that give you a headache. Red dye wasn't just a product, it was an industry, with guilds, taxes, and spies stealing recipes. You're tempted to swipe a sample, but the dyer's got a knife on his belt, and you're not that brave. Joke number 3, why was the dyer so grumpy because his profits were always in the red? You're grinning, but you keep moving, the market's chaos pulling you along like a current. As you weave toward the square's edge, the red cloth around you feels alive, each thread a story of bugs, ships, and gold. Your cloak's hem snags on a cobblestone, and you tug it free, wondering how many hands touched its dye. The market's fading behind you, but Red's grip doesn't loosen its money, power, and a hint of danger. Remember those blood-mixed paints from the chapel? They're starting to feel tame compared to this cutthroat dye game. You leave the clamor of Florence's dye market behind, the scent of Kermo still clinging to your crimson cloak. And now you're trudging across a muddy field, where the symbolism of red and medieval clothing trades the merchant's hustle for the chaos of war. It's 1415 and you're near Agincourt, France, where the air smells of wet leather and fear, and the distant clang of armor makes your teeth rattle. Red's no longer just a pricey dye, it's a battle cry, flapping on banners that scream defiance over the shouts of soldiers and the snort of war horses. You're standing on a hill, gripping your cloak as wind whips it like a flag. Below, English and French armies face off, their banners snapping in the breeze. Reds everywhere, scarlet pennants, crimson shields, even the tabards of knights who look like they've seen one too many tavern brawls. In medieval warfare, red wasn't just for show, it was a psychological weapon. That bright hue cut through fog and dust, signaling courage, danger, or just we're not backing down. You spot a red lion rampant on an English banner, its claws stitched in thread that probably cost a village's harvest. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing spills over here. Knights wear red surcoats to say, I'm bold, I'm rich, and I'm ready to ruin your day. Let's anchor this with a big moment, the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. Henry III's English army, outnumbered and exhausted, faced a French force that thought it had this in the bag. You're there, mud sucking at your boots, watching red banners mark the English lines. Henry's own standard, with its scarlet crosses, rallies his men as longbows rain arrows. The red flags aren't just for navigation, they're a middle finger to the enemy, boosting morale like a medieval energy drink. You hear soldiers cheering, their voices hoarse, and smell the acrid tang of blood and churned earth. Against all odds, the English win, and those red banners become legends, waved in victory as the French retreat. Here's an odd fact to raise your eyebrows. Some medieval armies dyed their banners red with madder root, a cheaper alternative to kermes. But it faded fast sometimes mid-battle. Imagine a knight squinting at his own flag, muttering, "Was that red this morning?" You're chuckling, picturing him blaming the dyer instead of the rain. Joke number 1. Why did the banner fade in battle? Because it couldn't handle the pressure. You stifle a laugh, hoping the grizzled archer nearby doesn't think you're mocking his aim. Red's psychological edge wasn't just about looking fierce. It was science before anyone called it that red catches the eye, spikes the pulse, makes you feel alive or terrified. You're watching a French knight in a red-plumed helmet charge, his horse kicking up clods of dirt. That plume's screaming, "Target me if you dare." It's bold. But you're betting he's sweating under all that swagger. Heraldry, with its red lions, crosses, and dragons, was like a medieval logo, telling friend from foe in the chaos. Your cloak's red hem feels out of place here, you're no knight, but it's like you're accidentally cosplaying one. Historians still debate whether red banners were chosen for their visibility or their emotional punch. Some say it was practical red shows up better in the smoke of battle. Others argue it was symbolic, tying warriors to blood, sacrifice, or even the church's martyr vibe from that Siena chapel. Either way, you're feeling the adrenaline. Standing here as arrows whistle past, your cloak's crimson edge flaps, catching a soldier's eye, and he grumbles, "Nice color, but can you shoot?" You shrug, wishing you'd stayed in the market. Joke number 2. What do you call a knight in a red surcoat? A walking bullseye with an ego. You smirk. But keep it quiet, these guys don't look like they appreciate humor. The field's a mess of noise swords clashing, horses neighing, and the thump of boots in mud. You smell smoke from a distant fire, and your cloak's weight drags as you sidestep a puddle. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't just status, it's survival. A way to stand out without getting skewered by your own side. You notice a squire patching a torn red banner, his needle flashing in the dim light. He's muttering about his lord's bad luck, and you wonder if that flag's seen too many battles. Red in heraldry wasn't random families like the Lancasters used it to claim lineage, power, or divine favor. You're tempted to ask the squire if his boss paid extra for that shade, but he looks like he'd rather stab the banner than fix it. Joke number 3. Why did the knight love his red flag? Because it waved better than his pickup lines. You're grinning, but you pull your hood up, hoping no one notices your civilian vibes. As you trudge away from the battlefield, the red banners still flutter in your mind's eye like ghosts of the fight. Your cloak's hem is caked with mud, but its crimson still stands out, tying you to this world of blood and bravado. The air's colder now, carrying the faint tang of iron, and you're wondering where red's power shows up next. Remember those perfumed robes from the castle? Or the blood-mixed paints from the chapel? They're starting to feel like warm-ups for this raw, red-soaked chaos. You stumble away from Agincourt's muddy chaos, your crimson cloak now splattered with grime from the battlefield, and find yourself in a cramped village square, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing isn't about glory, it's a brand of shame. It's 1390 and you're in Cologne, Germany, where the air smells of stale bread and river damp, and the clatter of wooden clogs echoes off stone walls. Torches flicker, casting an orange glow, but red stands out here. Not on proud banners or holy robes, but on the clothes of people the town would rather forget. You're standing near a market stall, its vendor eyeing you warily as you tug your cloak to hide its red hem. Turns out that color's got a different vibe here. In medieval Europe, red was slapped on social outcasts like a warning label. Prostitutes, lepers, and certain religious minorities were forced to wear scarlet patches, hoods, or even full garments to mark them as other. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here's a cruel twist. It's not about divine power or royal flex, but about control, making sure everyone knows who's at the bottom of the heap. You feel the weight of stares, and the square's chatter feels sharper, like it's slicing through you. Let's anchor this with a big moment, the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215. This church gathering, held in Rome, didn't just debate theology, it laid down rules that changed lives, including clothing laws for marginalized groups. The council, led by Pope Innocent III, decreed that Jews and Muslims in Christian lands had to wear distinctive markers, often red or yellow badges. You're picturing it now, bishops in red vestments, ironically arguing over how to use red to isolate others. The square in Cologne feels its ripple effects. You spot a man with a red patch on his sleeve, his head down as he hurries past. The air's thick with tension, and you smell smoke from a nearby hearth, mingling with the sour tang of fear. Here's an odd fact to make you blink in some towns. Executioners wore red hoods or cloaks to stand out during public punishments, turning red into a symbol of death's bureaucracy. Imagine the executioner complaining, "This hood clashes with my boots," as he sharpens his axe. You're smirking, but the thought chills you. Joke number 1. Why did the executioner love red? Because it hid the stains and looked intimidating. You keep your laugh quiet. Not wanting to draw more eyes, your cloak's already making you feel like a target. These clothing laws weren't just about shame. They were about power. Sumptuary laws, like the ones you dodged in the castle and overlapped here, but with a darker edge. While nobles flaunted red to flex wealth, outcasts were forced into it to signal danger or sin. You notice a woman in a red shawl, her eyes darting as kids throw pebbles her way. She's likely a prostitute, marked by law to keep honest folk at bay. You want to say something, but the crowd's mood feels like a taut bowstring. Your cloak's crimson hem, once a point of pride, now feels like a liability. Maybe you should have gone with gray, but hindsight's a jerk. Historians still debate whether these red markers were about public safety or pure prejudice. Some argue they protected communities like, hey, lepers, wear red so we can avoid you. Others say it was a power grab, letting the church and state control who belonged. Either way, you're in this square and red's not a color of unity. It's a divider, splitting the crowd into us and them. You shift your weight, your boots scuffing dirt, and the chill seeps through your cloak. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here feels like a slap, and you're just a bystander. Joke number 2. What do you call a red badge in this town? A medieval do not disturb sign. You snicker, but a passing guard's glare shuts you up fast. The square's alive with noise vendors hawking, dogs barking, a bell tolling from the church tower. You smell fish from a nearby cart, and it's not helping the mood. You're tempted to ditch your cloak, but it's all you've got against the evening's bite. Besides, you're starting to see red's double life shame for some status for others, like it's playing both sides. You catch sight of a leper, his red hood pulled low, ringing a bell to warn folks away. His shuffle's slow, and the crowd parts like he's contagious bad luck. It's grim, and you're wondering how red went from sacred to curse so fast. Joke number 3, why did the leper hate his red hood? Because it was the worst fashion trend since chainmail underwear. You're grinning, but its force the square's heaviness is sinking into your bones. The torchlight makes red glow like embers, and you're feeling the weight of every scarlet stitch around you. As you slip toward an alley to escape the square's glare, the red markers linger in your mind, like stains you can't unsee. Your cloak's crimson hem drags through dust, and you're hyper-aware of its color now, tying you to this world of rules and rejection. The air's colder, carrying the faint scent of river muck, and you're wondering where Red's story goes next. Remember those Kermes vats from Florence's market? They feel like a distant dream compared to this raw, red shame. You slip away from Cologne's judgmental square, the red patches of shame still flickering in your mind. And now you're ducking into a shadowy workshop, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing takes a wild turn into something mystical. It's 1420 and you're in Prague, where the air smells of molten metal and singed herbs, and the faint clink of glass vials echoes like a secret code. Candlelight dances on walls scribbled with cryptic symbols, and you're standing in an alchemist's lair, where red isn't just a color, it's the key to unlocking the universe. You're hovering near a cluttered table, your crimson cloak brushing against a stack of parchments that look one sneeze away from crumbling. The alchemist, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, peers into a bubbling flask glowing ruby red. In medieval alchemy, red was the holy grail, tied to the philosopher's stone, a mythical substance said to turn lead into gold and grant eternal life. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing creeps in here too. The alchemist's robe has a scarlet trim, like he's signaling his quest for transformation. You catch a whiff of sulfur, sharp enough to make your eyes water, and wonder if this guy's chasing immortality or just a really bad recipe. Let's anchor this with a big moment, the publication of Aurora Consurgens around 1400, a mysterious alchemical text attributed maybe to Thomas Aquinas. This manuscript, packed with red-tinted illustrations, was a medieval bestseller among the esoteric crowd. You're picturing it now, monks and scholars huddled in Prague's libraries, decoding its scarlet dragons and ruby suns, all hinting at the philosopher's stone. You're in this workshop, watching the alchemist sketch a red lion code for a key alchemical stage while muttering Latin phrases. The air's thick with wax and charcoal, and you hear a distant church bell, reminding you the world outside doesn't trust this weird science. Here's an odd fact to make you tilt your head. Some alchemists believed red wine was a shortcut to the philosopher's stone, so they'd chug it during experiments, claiming it inspired their work. Imagine this guy sloshing wine, slurring, "It's for science," while his apprentice rolls their eyes. You're smirking, picturing a medieval hangover labeled research. Joke number 1. Why did the alchemist drink red wine? Because he thought it was the grape of life. You stifle a laugh, hoping the alchemist doesn't notice he looks like he'd turn you into a toad for interrupting. Alchemy wasn't just about gold, it was about transformation. Body, soul, and maybe even the cosmos. Red marked the final stage, called rubedo Latin for redness, where base materials became divine. You're watching the alchemist heat a crucible, its contents glowing like liquid fire. He's chasing that red, believing it's the universe's ultimate flex. Your cloak's crimson hem catches the candlelight, and you wonder if it's got a touch of alchemical magic or just good dye from Florence's market. The workshop's heat makes you sweat, and the smell of molten lead is like a punch to the nose. You're half expecting the flask to explode, but the alchemist's too focused to care. Historians still debate whether alchemy's red obsession was symbolic or practical. Some say it was spiritual. Red stood for purification, like Christ's blood from that Siena chapel. Others argue it was chemical. Red compounds like cinnabar mercury sulfide were key ingredients, even if they were toxic. Either way, you're in this smoky room, and red feels like a riddle. The alchemist's muttering about the Red King and White Queen, and you're wondering if he's lost it or cracked the code. Your cloak's weight drags and you shift, knocking over a vial that thankfully doesn't shatter. Joke number 2. What do you call an alchemist's red robe? A lab coat with mystical vibes. You snicker. But the apprentice glares, stirring a pot that smells like burnt dreams. The workshop's alive with sounds, the hiss of cooling metal, the scratch of quill on parchment, the alchemist's low chants. You notice a red-stained cloth on the table, probably used to wipe up failed experiments. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't about shame or war. It's about chasing the impossible. Like wearing a color that says, "I'm rewriting reality." You spot a tiny ruby in a dish, glinting like it's winking at you. Alchemists thought red gems held cosmic power, maybe even a spark of the philosopher's stone. The alchemist's muttering about transmutation, and you're tempted to ask if he's ever turned lead into lunch money, but his wild eyes say he's not in the mood for jokes. Joke number 3. Why was the alchemist obsessed with red? Because he wanted to paint the town gold. You're grinning, but you pull your hood up, feeling like an outsider in this weird, red-tinted world. As you edge toward the workshop's door, the red glow from the flask lingers in your eyes, like a promise or a warning. Your cloak's crimson hem snags on a splintered floorboard and you tug it free, wondering how many secrets red's hiding. The air outside hits you, cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of river mud. You're already curious where red's magic leads next, maybe less smoky, but probably just as wild. Remember those red badges from Cologne Square? They feel like a different universe compared to this alchemical fever dream. You slip out of the alchemist's smoky workshop, the red glow of his flask still dancing in your eyes, and now you're stepping into a dimly lit apothecary, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing trades mystical riddles for the hope of healing. It's 1450 and you're in Paris, France, where the air smells of dried herbs and something faintly sour, like old wine gone bad. Shelves groan under jars of powders and roots, and a mortar's rhythmic grind echoes like a heartbeat. Red's not just a color here, it's medicine, woven into cures that sound half magic, half madness. You're hovering near a wooden counter, your crimson cloak brushing against a sack of saffron that's probably worth more than your house. The apothecary, a woman with sharp eyes and stained fingers, is grinding red coral into a fine powder. In medieval medicine, red was a big deal thought to channel vitality, balance humors, or chase away demons making you sneeze. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing sneaks in too. Her apron has a red border, maybe a nod to the healing power she's harnessing. You catch a whiff of rosemary and something metallic, and you're wondering if this place smells better or worse than that alchemist's lair. Let's anchor this with a big moment, the founding of the University of Paris's medical faculty, formalized by 1210, which became a hub for medieval healing theories. This place trained physicians who prescribed red-based remedies, from ruby elixirs to scarlet bandages. You're picturing it now, students in red-trimmed robes debating whether red wine cures fevers or just makes you forget them. You're in this apothecary, watching the woman mix coral powder with honey, claiming it'll fix a nobleman's cough. The street outside hums with cartwheels and shouts, and you smell wood smoke drifting through the open door. Red's everywhere, jars of red ochre, vials of rose water, even a red wax seal on a scroll of recipes. Here's an odd fact to make you grimace. Some medieval doctors wrapped patients in red cloth to draw out fevers, believing the color could suck illness like a magnet. Imagine being swaddled in scarlet, sweating buckets, while the doctor says, "Trust the red." You're smirking, picturing the patient muttering, "This better work or I'm haunting you." Joke number 1. Why did the doctor use red cloth? Because it was the hottest cure in town. You stifle a chuckle, hoping the apothecary doesn't think you're laughing at her craft. Red's healing power wasn't just superstition, it was tied to ancient ideas about blood and life. Rubies, red coral, and even red foods like pomegranates were prescribed for everything from heartaches to plague. You're watching the apothecary hand a customer a red amulet, swearing it'll ward off evil spirits. The guy's skeptical, but he pays up, clutching it like a lifeline. Your cloak's crimson hem feels oddly fitting here, like you're part of the Red Cure Club, though you're not sure you'd trust a ruby smoothie. The shop's warm, and you're sweating, the scent of lavender clashing with that sour wine smell. Historians still debate whether red's medical use was symbolic or based on observation. Some say it was placebo. Red's intensity made people feel stronger. Others argue medieval doctors noticed red compounds, like iron-rich ochre, sometimes worked, even if they didn't know why. Either way, you're in this apothecary, and red feels like a gamble. The apothecary's now crushing red rose petals, and you're wondering if it's for love potions or just a fancy headache cure. Your cloak's weight drags, and you shift, knocking a jar that thankfully doesn't break. Joke number 2. What do you call a red amulet? A medieval mood ring with healing vibes? You snicker, but the customer glares, clutching his amulet tighter. The apothecary's mortar grinds on, and you hear a faint drip from a leaking vial. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't about shame or alchemy, it's about hope. Like wearing a color that says, "I'm fighting to live." You notice a red-stained bandage on a shelf, probably for wrapping wounds, and you're betting it's more about faith than science. You spot a tiny ruby in a glass case, glinting like it's got secrets. Medieval texts, like Hildegard of Bingen's, claimed rubies could cure melancholy if worn near the heart. The apothecary's muttering about a noblewoman who swears by her ruby ring, and you're tempted to ask if it's ever fixed a bad day, but her knife's a bit too close for comfort. Joke number 3. Why did the noblewoman love her ruby? Because it sparkled brighter than her doctor's advice. You're grinning, but you pull your hood up, feeling like you're tempting fate in this weird red-tinted shop. As you edge toward the door, the red coral powder lingers in your nose. Like a promise of health you're not sure you buy. Your cloak's crimson hem snags on a splintered floorboard, and you tug it free, wondering how many cures red's been tied to. The air outside hits you, cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of river mud. You're already curious where red's power shows up next. Maybe less pungent, but probably just as strange. Remember those red hoods from Cologne Square? Or the alchemist's ruby flask? They're starting to feel like pieces of a bigger, redder puzzle. You step out of the apothecary's herb-scented haze, the red coral powder still tickling your nose. And now you're squeezing into a cluttered artist's studio, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing shifts from healing hope to a painter's sweaty nightmare. It's 1460 and you're in Bruges, Belgium, where the air smells of linseed oil and dust, and the scratch of brushes on wood panels hums like a restless melody. Sunlight filters through a grimy window, catching flecks of scarlet powder that dance like fireflies. Red's not just a color here, it's a battle. A toxic puzzle that's got artisans cursing their craft. You're hovering near a workbench, your crimson cloak snagging on a splintered easel, and you're already regretting not standing there. The artist, a guy with paint-smeared hands and a scowl, is grinding cinnabar crystals into a fine red pigment, his breath hissing through gritted teeth. In medieval art, red pigments like cinnabar and vermilion were a double-edged sword, gorgeous but deadly, packed with mercury that could make you shake or see ghosts. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing echoes here. The artist's apron, stained red, feels like a nod to the struggle, like he's wearing his own warning label. You catch a sharp, metallic whiff from the pigment, and it's like the air's daring you to stay. Let's anchor this with a big moment, the completion of Rogier van der Weyden's Last Judgment altarpiece around 1452 for the Hôtel Dieu in Beaune. This massive work, with its blazing reds, was a game changer, showing off the power and pain of red pigments. You're picturing it now, the altarpiece unveiled, its scarlet flames and Christ's red robe glowing like a fever dream. You're in this studio, imagining the artists who slaved over these reds, their hands trembling from mercury exposure. The street outside buzzes with merchants' shouts, and you smell turpentine cutting through the studio's musty air. That red's a showstopper, but it came at a cost some painters didn't live long enough to see their work hung. Here's an odd fact to make you wince. Some artists used urine, yep. You heard that right, to mix red pigments, thinking it stabilized the color. Imagine this guy muttering, "Hope nobody asks what's in the paint," while pouring a suspicious liquid. You're smirking, picturing him holding his nose like it's a bad wine tasting. Joke number 1. Why did the artist use urine in his red? Because he wanted his work to really leave a mark. You stifle a laugh, hoping the painter doesn't catch you grinning. He looks like he's one spill away from a meltdown. Red pigments weren't just toxic, they were a technical headache. Cinnabar could darken over time, and vermilion flaked if you sneezed too hard. You're watching the artist layer red onto a panel, cursing as it smears unevenly. He's painting a saint's robe, and that scarlet's got a pop. But it's fighting him every step. Your cloak's crimson hem feels like a taunt now. Its dye probably easier to handle than this finicky paint. The studio's warm, and you're sweating. The scent of oil and wood shavings clogging your nose. You're half expecting the panel to catch fire from the artist's glare alone. Historians still debate whether artists knew red pigments were dangerous or just shrugged it off. Some say they saw friends get sick and kept painting anyway. Art was worth the risk. Others argue they didn't connect the dots, blaming bad humors instead of mercury. Either way, you're in the studio, and red feels like a gamble. The artist's muttering about a deadline for a rich patron, and you're wondering if he's more scared of the paint or the client. Your cloak drags, and you shift, knocking a brush that thankfully doesn't ruin his work. Joke number 2. What do you call a painter's red pigment? A brush with death in every stroke. You snicker, but the artist's apprentice, stirring a pot of glue, shoots you a look like you're the toxic one. The studio's alive with sounds: the creak of floorboards, the soft scrape of a palette knife, the artist's low grumbles. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't about healing or shame, it's about sacrifice. Like wearing a color that says, "I'm risking my life for beauty." You spot a tiny jar of red lake pigment, made from crushed bugs like the ceremonies from Florence's market. It's less toxic, but fades fast, and the artist's grumbling about patrons who want eternal red on a budget. He's tempted to mix in cheaper matter, but that's like serving watered-down wine at a feast. You're curious if he's ever faked a cinnabar batch. But his knife's too close for that chat. Joke number 3. Why did the artist hate cheap red? Because it faded faster than his patience. You're grinning, but you pull your hood up, feeling like you're dodging a paint-splattered tantrum. As you edge toward the studio's door, the red pigment's metallic tang lingers, like a warning you can't shake. Your cloak's crimson hem catches on a nail, and you tug it free, wondering how many artists paid for that color with their health. The air outside hits you, cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of canal water. You're already curious where red struggle leads next, maybe less poisonous, but probably just as intense. Remember those red bandages from the apothecary? Or the alchemist's ruby flask? They're starting to feel like warm-ups for this deadly red dance. You slip out of the artist's toxic studio, the sting of cinnabar still sharp in your nose, and now you're gliding into a quiet scriptorium, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing softens into something almost sweet love's burning hue. It's 1375 and you're in Avignon, France, where the air smells of parchment and beeswax, and the soft scratch of quills fills the room like a lullaby. Candlelight flickers over monks hunched at desks, but this isn't just Bible copying central. Here, red ink bleeds romance, spilling into love poetry and manuscripts that make your heart skip a beat. You're leaning over a monk's shoulder, careful. Your crimson cloak's hem is dangerously close to his ink pot. He's illuminating a manuscript, painting a lover's red heart pierced by an arrow, the scarlet vivid against creamy vellum. In medieval courtly love, red was the color of passion, desire, and the kind of longing that kept knights awake writing sappy poems. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing weaves in here. The lady in the manuscript wears a red gown, signaling she's the heartbreaker of some troubadour's dreams. You catch a whiff of the ink, sharp with iron gall and a hint of rosewater, and it's like the room's whispering secrets. Let's anchor this with a big moment: the composition of The Romance of the Rose, a blockbuster allegorical poem begun by Guillaume de Lorry around 1230 and finished by Jean de Meun by 1275. This epic, dripping with red imagery roses, hearts. Blushing Cheeks was the medieval equivalent of a rom-com marathon. You're picturing it now: knights and ladies in Avignon's courts reciting its lines, swooning over red's romantic glow. You're in this scriptorium, watching the monk add red rubrication to a copy, his quill trembling like he's caught the love bug himself. Outside, you hear the clop of horses and a distant lute, and the air's warm with wax and dust. Here's an odd fact to make you grin. Some medieval love letters were sealed with red wax mixed with crushed rose petals, because nothing says I am into you like floral stationery. Imagine a knight sniffing his letter, muttering, "Smells like love," or "my garden." You're smirking, picturing him fumbling to break the seal without ruining the vibe. Joke number 1. Why did the knight use rose-scented wax? Because he wanted his love to bloom on delivery. You stifle a chuckle, hoping the monk doesn't think you're mocking his masterpiece. Red in courtly love wasn't just pretty, it was a language. Poets like Chrétien de Troyes used red to paint desire, from blushing cheeks to blood spilled for a lady's honor. You're flipping through a manuscript mentally. Don't touch and spot a red-inked verse about a knight's heart burning like a ruby. It's cheesy, but it hits. The monk's now painting a rose, its petals so red they seem to pulse. Your cloak's crimson hem feels oddly romantic here, like you're channeling a bit of that troubadour swagger, though you're more likely to trip than serenade. The scriptorium's quiet, save for the quills and a faint creak from the wooden beams. Historians still debate whether courtly love's red obsession was pure fantasy or reflected real romance. Some say it was a literary game, with knights and ladies playing roles like medieval cosplayers. Others argue it shaped actual relationships, with red gifts like scarlet ribbons sealing real bonds. Either way, you're in this scriptorium, and red feels like a spark. The monk's muttering about a deadline for a noblewoman's commission, and you're wondering if she's expecting a love poem or just showing off. Your cloak's weight drags, and you shift, nearly knocking a candle crisis averted. Joke number 2. What do you call red ink in a love poem? A heart attack in written form. You snicker, but the monk next to you glares, his quill pausing mid-stroke. The room's alive with sounds, the soft rustle of vellum, the drip of wax, the monk's low hum as he works. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't about poison or shame, it's about longing. Like wearing a color that says, "My heart's on fire? Send help." You notice a red ribbon tied to a finished manuscript, probably a gift for some smitten lord. You spot a tiny vial of red ink. Its hue so deep it's like liquid rubies. Medieval scribes made it from madder or cochineal, and this monk's clearly proud of his batch. He's muttering about a lady who insisted on the reddest red for her book of hours. And you're tempted to ask if she's in love or just extra, but his quill's too pointy for that chat. Joke number 3. Why was the scribe obsessed with red ink? Because he wanted to write love that bleeds off the page? You're grinning, but you pull your hood up, feeling like you're crashing a medieval Valentine's Day. As you edge toward the scriptorium's door, the red heart on that manuscript lingers, like a crush you can't shake. Your cloak's crimson hem brushes the floor, and you tug it free, wondering how many love stories red's carried. The air outside hits you, cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of river mist. You're already curious where red's passion leads next, maybe less poetic, but probably just as intense. Remember those toxic paints from Bruges' studio? Or the apothecary's red coral? They're starting to feel like distant cousins to this rosy, red romance. You ease out of Avignon's scriptorium, the red-inked hearts of love poems still tugging at your thoughts. And now you're slinking into a firelit church hall, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing twists from romance to a warning of sin. It's 1320 and you're in Florence, Italy, where the air smells of damp stone and smoky tallow, and a preacher's voice booms like thunder over a fidgeting crowd. Red's not swoony here, it's the color of temptation, lust, and a one-way ticket to eternal barbecue. painted vivid in sermons and stories like Dante's Inferno. You're squeezed onto a hard pew, your crimson cloak bunched to avoid the splintery wood, and you're already regretting not standing in the back. The preacher, all wild eyes and flapping red vestments, points at a fresco of a scarlet-clad demon tempting souls. In medieval moral teachings, red was sin's poster child, especially lust, the kind that made monks clutch their rosaries and nobles blush behind their fans. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing screams danger here. The preacher's vestments, ironically red, seem to accuse the crowd, like he's saying, "Nice cloak, but don't get cocky." You catch a whiff of incense, sharp and cloying, and the hall's heat makes your skin prickle. Let's anchor this with a big moment, the publication of Dante Alighieri's Inferno, part of his Divine Comedy, around 1314. This epic poem, a medieval bestseller, dragged readers through hell's circles, with red popping up in flames, blood, and sinful souls. You're picturing it now, Florentines whispering about Dante's vivid reds, from the river Phlegethon's boiling blood to Satan's ruddy glow. You're in this hall, hearing the preacher quote Dante, his voice rising as he describes lustful sinners tossed in red-hot winds. The crowd's murmuring, and you hear the creak of pews and a cough from someone who's clearly spooked. Red's not just a color, it's a moral landmine. Here's an odd fact to make you quirk a brow. Some medieval sermons claimed red lipstick, made from crushed cochineal, was a devil's trick to lure men into lust. Imagine a nun hissing, "Wipe that sin off your face," while the accused lady just wants to look cute. You're smirking, picturing a medieval makeup band gone wrong. Joke number 1. Why did the preacher hate red lipstick? Because it was too hot for salvation. You stifle a chuckle, hoping the lady next to you in a red headscarf doesn't think you're judging her style. Red's sinful vibe wasn't just preached, it was woven into literature and art. Dante's second circle of hell, where lustful lovers like Paolo and Francesca spin in red-tinted storms, was a cautionary tale that hit hard. You're staring at that fresco, where red-gowned temptress lures a knight to doom, her smile too knowing. Your cloak's crimson hem feels like a bad choice now, like you're accidentally cosplaying a sinner. The preacher's pacing, his voice a low growl, and you're sweating. The hall's air thick with wax and fear. You're half expecting him to point at you and yell, "Red cloak, red soul." Historians still debate whether red's link to sin was about control or genuine belief. Some say the church used red's intensity to scare folks into line, like a medieval PSA against bad choices. Others argue people really saw red as lust's color, thanks to its ties to blood and passion from the love poems. Either way, you're in this hall, and red feels like a spotlight. The preacher's now railing about scarlet-clad harlots, and you're wondering if he's read too much Dante or just hates fashion. Your cloak's weight drags, and you shift, nearly elbowing a kid who's doodling on his sleeve. Joke number 2. What do you call a red gown in a sermon? A one-way ticket to Dante's dance party. You snicker, but the guy behind you huffs, probably thinking you're not taking hell seriously. The hall's alive with sounds, the preacher's boots thumping, the rustle of cloaks, a faint bell tolling outside. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't about love or healing, it's about judgment. Like wearing a color that says, "I'm one sermon away from trouble." You notice a red ribbon on a woman's braid, and you're betting she's ignoring the preacher's rant. You spot a Bible on a lectern, its red rubrication glowing like embers. Red ink, used for holy texts, flips to sin's marker in this context, like it's playing both sides. The preacher's waving a scroll, maybe a copy of Dante's lines, and you're tempted to ask if he's got a favorite sinner, but his glare's too fierce for banter. Joke number 3, why was red the preacher's favorite color? Because it scared the hell out of everyone. You're grinning, but you pull your hood up, feeling like you're dodging a divine PowerPoint on sin. As you inch toward the hall's door, the red fresco's demon lingers in your mind, like a warning you can't unsee. Your cloak's crimson hem brushes the floor, and you tug it free, wondering how red went from poetic to perilous so fast. The air outside hits you, cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of river damp. You're already curious where red's story goes next, maybe less preachy, but probably just as intense. Remember those rose-scented love letters from Avignon? Or the artist's toxic reds? They're starting to feel like a warm-up for this fiery, red-hot guilt trip. You slip out of Florence's fire and brimstone church hall, the preacher's red-tinted warning still ringing in your ears, and now you're swept into a vibrant town square, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing trades sin's shadow for the joy of celebration. It's 1380 and you're in York, England, during a feast day, where the air smells of roasted meat and spilled ale, and the clamor of drums and laughter bounces off stone walls. Red's everywhere banners, ribbons, cloaks turning the square into a sea of scarlet that feels like a party the devil didn't get invited to. You're jostling through the crowd, your crimson cloak flapping like it's trying to join the fun, though you're dodging a slosh of wine from a tipsy reveler. It's the Feast of Corpus Christi, and the whole town's out, decked in red to honor the liturgical calendar's big days. Red was the color of choice for these festivals, tied to Christ's blood and the church's sacred vibes, but also just screaming. Let's eat. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing shines here. Your cloak blends with the scarlet tunics of guild members parading past, their red sashes shouting pride and community. You catch a whiff of fresh bread and the smoky tang of bonfires, and the square's pulse makes your heart race. Let's anchor this with a big moment the establishment of the York Corpus Christi plays in the 1370s, a cycle of street performances that turned the city into a medieval theater. These plays, acted by guilds, used red props and costumes to dramatize Christ's passion, drawing crowds who cheered like it was a blockbuster premiere. You're there, squeezed between a baker and a weaver, watching actors in red robes reenact the crucifixion, their fake blood a bit too convincing. The crowd's buzzing, and you hear lute strumming and kids giggling as a red-draped cart rolls by. Red's not just holy here, it's festive, tying the sacred to the sheer joy of being alive. Here's an odd fact to make you chuckle during some feast days. Townsfolk dyed their bread red with sandalwood to honor the occasion, though it probably just made their teeth pink. Imagine biting into a loaf and muttering, "Tastes like a church window." You're smirking, picturing a baker shrugging off complaints with a grin. Joke number 1, why did they dye the bread red? Because nothing says holy feast like a sandwich that glows. You stifle a laugh, hoping the guildmaster nearby doesn't think you're mocking his red hat. These festivals weren't just about faith. They were social glue. Red banners marked guild processions, and wearing red showed you belonged. Whether you were a butcher or a baron, you're watching a juggler toss red apples, his scarlet cape swirling like he's auditioning for a circus. Your cloak's crimson hem catches a gust, and you feel a part of the chaos. Though you're betting someone's about to spill ale on it, the square's alive with sensory overload, the crackle of bonfires, the sweet tang of spiced wine, the brush of wool against your skin as the crowd presses in. Red's not about sin here, it's about connection. Like a color that says, we're all in this together. Historians still debate whether red's dominance in feast days was about devotion or just showing off. Some say it was pure piety, linking to liturgical colors like those in Chartres Cathedral. Others argue it was a flex guilds and towns used red to flaunt wealth and unity, like medieval team jerseys. Either way, you're in the square, and red feels like a hug you didn't ask for. The juggler's now tossing torches, their red flames dancing, and you're wondering if he's got a backup cape for when this goes wrong. Your cloak's weight drags, and you shift, nearly tripping over a kid chasing a red ribbon. Joke number 2. What do you call a red banner? At a feast, a party flag with holy swagger. You snicker, but the weaver next to you rolls her eyes, adjusting her red scarf like she's the star of this show. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't about shame or danger, it's about belonging. Like wearing a color that says, I'm here. Let's dance. You notice a red-draped altar in the square's center, where priests bless the feast, their vestments echoing the crowd's scarlet vibe. You spot a kid waving a red pennant, probably homemade, its dye already fading. Guilds spent fortunes on red fabrics, but regular folks made do with cheaper matter, hoping to fit in. You're tempted to ask the kid if he's aiming for a guild spot, but he's too busy cheering a play where a red-robed devil gets booed off stage. Joke number 3. Why was the devil's red costume a hit? Because even hell knows how to dress for a party. You're grinning, but you pull your hood up, feeling the crowd's energy like a tide pulling you along. As you weave toward the square's edge, the red banners and cloaks blur into a warm, festive haze, like a memory you want to keep. Your cloak's crimson hem snags on a cobblestone, and you tug it free, wondering how red became the life of the party. The air outside cools your face, carrying the faint scent of river mud and fading bonfires. You're already curious where Red's story goes next, maybe darker, but probably just as wild. Remember those red love letters from Avignon? Or the preacher's scarlet warnings? They're starting to feel like distant echoes in this red-hot celebration. You drift away from York's festive square, the red banners and laughter fading like a dream. And now you're trudging through a silent street, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing turns grim, stained with the fear of death. It's 1348 and you're in London, England, during the Black Death, where the air smells of smoke and decay, and the creak of a passing cart makes your stomach lurch. Red's no longer the life of the party, it's a mark of doom, slapped on doors to warn of plague inside, like a scarlet scream in a city gone quiet. You're clutching your crimson cloak, its hem muddy from the damp cobbles, wishing it didn't stand out so much. Houses around you are daubed with red crosses, painted in haste to signal infection. In plague times, red was mortality's calling card, used by officials to quarantine the sick and scare off the healthy. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing feels heavy here. Your cloak, once a badge of pride, now makes folks cross the street like you're carrying the pestilence yourself. You catch a whiff of burning pitch from a nearby bonfire, meant to cleanse the air, and the silence is broken only by a distant sob and the toll of a church bell. Let's anchor this with a big moment: the Black Death's arrival in London in 1348, part of the pandemic that ravaged Europe, killing millions. By autumn, the city was a ghost town, and red crosses on doors became as common as cobwebs. You're picturing it now: officials in red-trimmed cloaks, grimly marking houses with scarlet paint. While families inside prayed or fled, you're standing in this street, seeing a red cross smeared on a door, the paint still wet, like blood that won't dry. The air's thick with fear, and you hear the rattle of a plague cart, its driver shouting for the dead. Red's not festive or holy here, it's a warning you can't unsee. Here's an odd fact to make you blink: some plague doctors wore red cords around their wrists, believing it warded off the disease, like a medieval lucky charm. Imagine a doctor tying on his cord, muttering, "Better red than dead," while dodging a patient's cough. You're smirking, picturing him tripping over his own beak mask in the rush. Joke number 1. Why did the plague doctor wear red? Because he wanted to outshine the disease. You stifle a chuckle, hoping the old woman nearby, clutching a red rag, doesn't think you're heartless. Red's role in plague times wasn't just about marking doors. It was tied to blood, death, and the church's obsession with mortality. You spot a priest in a red vestment, hurrying to give last rites, his robe catching the torchlight like a flicker of hope or judgment. Your cloak's crimson hem feels like a liability now, like it's shouting, "Check me for sores." The street's damp, and you're shivering. The smell of rot mingling with the faint tang of vinegar used to purify the air. You're half expecting someone to slap a red cross on you, just for standing here. Historians still debate whether red plague markers were practical or pure panic. Some say they helped control the spread, signaling danger like a medieval biohazard sign. Others argue they fueled fear, turning red into a symbol of despair rather than salvation. Either way, you're in this street, and red feels like a curse. The old woman's muttering prayers, her red rag clutched like it's all she's got left. Your cloak's weight drags, and you shift, nearly slipping on a slick cobble, wishing you'd worn something less conspicuous. Joke number 2. What do you call a red cross on a plague door, a do not enter sign with extra drama? You snicker, but the sound dies fast. The street's too eerie for humor. The silence is heavy, broken by the creak of shutters and the distant wail of someone grieving. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't about joy or romance, it's about survival. Like wearing a color that says, "I'm still here." Barely. You notice a red cloth tied to a window, maybe a signal for help, or just a family's last stand. You spot a kid, pale and wide-eyed, clutching a red ribbon like it's a lifeline. Some believed red could protect against plague, a holdover from those apothecary cures, but it's hard to buy that now. You're tempted to ask the kid if he thinks red's magic, but his haunted look stops you cold. Joke number 3, why did the kid tie on a red ribbon? Because he heard it was the trendiest way to dodge death. You're grinning, but you pull your hood up, feeling the weight of eyes from darkened windows, like the whole street's judging your crimson cloak. As you hurry toward a quieter alley, the red crosses on doors linger in your mind, like scars on the city. Your cloak's crimson hem slaps against your boots, and you tug it close, wondering how red became death's signature. The air's colder now, carrying the faint stench of burning herbs and despair. You're already curious where Red's story goes next, maybe less grim, but probably just as heavy. Remember those red feast day banners from York, or the romantic red ink of Avignon? They feel like a lifetime ago in this plague-ravaged, red-marked world. You slip away from London's plague-haunted streets, the red crosses on doors still searing your memory, and now you're striding into a bustling city hall, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing shifts from death's mark to the pulse of power. It's 1400 and you're in Siena, Italy, where the air smells of ink and wax, and the murmur of counselors' voices hums like a hive. Red's everywhere seals, banners, robes not as a warning, but as a flex, shouting loyalty and ambition in a world where politics is a high-stakes game. You're standing in the Palazzo Pubblico, your crimson cloak catching the flicker of torchlight, though you're wishing it didn't make you look so conspicuous among these sharp-eyed politicians. The walls are draped with red banners embroidered with Siena's black and white crest, and a table's piled with scrolls stamped with scarlet wax. In medieval city-states, red was political propaganda's MVP, used in papal bulls and guild emblems to rally crowds or silence rivals. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing shines here. Counselors in red-trimmed robes strut like they own the place, their scarlet sashes screaming authority. You catch a whiff of parchment and the sharp tang of sealing wax, and the hall's buzz makes your skin tingle. Let's anchor this with a big moment, the issuance of the papal bull Clericus Laicos in 1296 by Pope Boniface VIII, a power move that used red seals to assert church dominance over kings. Though it's a century old, its echoes linger in Siena, where red waxed papal letters still make rulers sweat. You're picturing it now, messengers in red cloaks delivering the bull, its scarlet seal glinting like a warning shot. You're in this hall, watching a guildmaster unroll a red-sealed decree, his face paling as he reads. The air's thick with tension, and you hear the rustle of silk and the clink of a counselor's chain. Red's not just a color here, it's a political hammer. Here's an odd fact to make you grin. Some guilds dyed their emblems red with leftover wine, claiming it blessed their banners, though it mostly just stained their hands. Imagine a guildmaster sloshing Merlot, muttering, "This better look official." You're smirking, picturing him scrubbing his fingers before a meeting. Joke number 1. Why did the guild use wine for red dye? Because nothing says power like a boozy banner? You stifle a chuckle, hoping the counselor nearby, adjusting his red sash, doesn't think you're mocking his swagger. Red's political punch wasn't just about seals or emblems, it was about control. Guilds like Siena's wool merchants used red in their flags to flaunt wealth and unity, while popes leaned on red's sacred vibe to bully secular lords. You're watching a debate unfold. Counselors waving red-ribboned scrolls like they're casting spells. Your cloak's crimson hem feels out of place, like you're a pawn in a chess game where everyone's a knight. The hall's warm, and you're sweating, the scent of wax mingling with the faint musk of wool from the counselor's robes. You're half expecting someone to challenge your cloak's shade, like it's not red enough for this power trip. Historians still debate whether red's political use was about tradition or psychological warfare. Some say it was practical. Red's bold hue stood out in crowded piazzas. Others argue it was strategic, tapping red's ties to blood and divine authority, like those martyr frescoes from Siena's chapel. Either way, you're in this hall, and red feels like a megaphone. The guildmaster's now arguing about a trade tax, his red sleeve flapping, and you're wondering if he's more loyal to Siena or his own wallet. Your cloak's weight drags, and you shift, nearly knocking a candle. Close call. Joke number 2. What do you call a red papal seal? A holy post-it note with attitude. You snicker, but the scribe across the table glares, his quill scratching a red-inked ledger. The hall's alive with sounds: the shuffle of boots, the clatter of goblets, a low chant from a nearby chapel. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here isn't about plague or passion. It's about dominance, like wearing a color that says, "I'm calling the shots." You notice a red banner with a wolf, Siena's symbol, and you're betting it cost more than your village's harvest. You spot a tiny red wax seal on a letter, its surface etched with a cross. Papal bulls used red to invoke Christ's blood. But in city politics, it's just muscle. The counselor's muttering about a rival guild's red emblem, and you're tempted to ask if they ever fight over who's got the reddest red, but his dagger's too shiny for that chat. Joke number 3. Why was the guild's red flag so bold? Because it wanted to outshine the Pope's letter. You're grinning, but you pull your hood up, feeling like a tourist in this red-soaked power play. As you edge toward the hall's exit, the red banners and seals linger in your mind, like a logo you can't forget. Your cloak's crimson hem brushes the marble floor, and you tug it free, wondering how red became politics' favorite weapon. The air outside hits you, cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of olive oil from a nearby market. You're already curious where red's story goes next, maybe less scheming, but probably just as fierce. Remember those red plague crosses from London, or York's festive banners? They're starting to feel like chapters in red's endless power grab. You step out of Siena's scheming city hall, the red seals and banners still flashing in your mind, and now you're wandering a quiet piazza, where the symbolism of red in medieval clothing begins to fade, like a dye left too long in the sun. It's 1490, and you're in Florence, Italy, on the cusp of the Renaissance, where the air smells of fresh plaster and river mist, and the hum of artisans' hammers echoes from nearby workshops. Red's still here on cloaks, frescoes, and market stalls, but its meaning's shifting, softening, as the Middle Ages give way to a world that's ready to repaint the past. You're leaning against a stone fountain, your crimson cloak catching the golden light of dusk, though it feels a bit old-fashioned among the sleek new styles. The piazza's alive with change painters sketch in red chalk. Merchants hawk printed books, and scholars argue about ideas that sound dangerously modern. Red, once a shout of divinity, power, or sin, is becoming subtler, a color of human passion and art rather than medieval dogma. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing lingers in your cloak, but it's like a memory. Nobles now mix red with golds and blues, chasing elegance over authority. You catch a whiff of roasting chestnuts and the faint tang of paint, and the evening's buzz feels like a page turning. Let's anchor this with a big moment: the Medici court's patronage of Botticelli's Birth of Venus around 1486, a painting that marked the Renaissance's embrace of red as beauty, not just power. You're picturing it now. Florence's elite gawking at the canvas, its red-haired Venus glowing with a softer scarlet than medieval martyr blood. You're in this piazza, overhearing artists debate Botticelli's red's less cinnabar, more matter, a nod to humanism's lighter touch. The crowd's chatter mixes with the splash of the fountain, and you feel the medieval world slipping away, red and all. Your cloak's crimson hem seems almost nostalgic, like it's clinging to a fading era. Here's an odd fact to make you smirk: some late medieval tailors used red thread to stitch lucky seams in clothes, believing it kept Renaissance demons at bay. Imagine a tailor whispering, "This seam's got your back," while threading a doublet. You're chuckling, picturing him selling superstition with every stitch. Joke number 1, why did the tailor use red thread? Because it was the seam of good fortune. You stifle a laugh, hoping the merchant nearby, in a red-trimmed cap, doesn't think you're mocking his deal. Red's Renaissance shift wasn't just aesthetic, it was philosophical. Where medieval red screamed sacrifice or sin, the new era used it for emotion, from Venus's blush to the glow of a lover's rose. You're watching a painter sketch a lady in a red gown, her pose more natural than those stiff martyr frescoes from Siena's chapel. Your cloak's crimson feels heavy, like it's stuck in the old world while Florence races ahead. The piazza's warm, and you're sweating, the scent of wet stone mingling with the faint sweetness of a fruit cart. You're half expecting someone to call your cloak quaint, but they're too busy arguing about perspective. Historians still debate whether red's Renaissance softening was a break from medieval roots or just a remix. Some say it was revolution humanism ditched red's heavy baggage for beauty. Others argue it was evolution. With medieval red's passion, think Avignon's love letters morphing into secular art. Either way, you're in this piazza, and red feels like it's taking a deep breath. The painter's now adding red to his sketch, muttering about vitality, and you're wondering if he's read Dante or just likes the color. Your cloak's weight drags, and you shift, nearly splashing your boots in the fountain. Joke number 2. What do you call red in a Renaissance painting? A medieval glow-up with style. You snicker. But the scholar nearby, clutching a red-inked book, shoots you a look like you've ruined his thesis. The piazza's alive with sounds: the clink of coins, the rustle of silk, a distant flute weaving through the chatter. The symbolism of red in medieval clothing here is fading, like wearing a color that says, "I'm classic, but I'm ready for change." You notice a red banner on a guild hall, its dye brighter than York's feast day flags, hinting at new wealth. You spot a kid selling red roses, their petals vivid against the gray stones. Roses, once tied to Christ's blood, now symbolize love and art, a Renaissance rebrand. You're tempted to buy one, but your coin's better spent on bread. The kid's grinning, and you wonder if he knows red's long story. Joke number 3. Why did the kid sell red roses? Because they were the petal of the new era. You're grinning, but you pull your hood up, feeling the piazza's energy like a tide pulling you into tomorrow. As you wander from the fountain, the red around you roses, sketches, cloaks blurs into a warm, hopeful haze, like a sunset on the Middle Ages. Your cloak's crimson hem brushes the cobbles and you tug it free, wondering what red will mean next. The world softens now, dear listener. As you drift from Florence's vibrant piazza, the red of your cloak fading into twilight's gentle embrace. Picture yourself in a cozy Canadian cabin, nestled among snow-dusted pines, where the crackle of a fireplace wraps you like a warm blanket. Red lingers in your mind, once bold, now a quiet glow, like embers settling in the hearth. You're safe here, far from medieval battles or plague-marked doors. Just you and the whisper of wind outside, carrying dreams across the great white north. Let the weight of Red's story slip away, like leaves on a quiet lake, and sink into sleep's embrace, knowing tomorrow's colors will find you when you're ready. Good night, Canada, from coast to coast.